President's Day. We have another Days in Our Lives, and unsurprisingly, this one is going to be President's Day themed. Normally, when I do these videos, I do multiple persons and biographies. However, since there are only so many presidents, and if I want to keep this going on, it's best to limit the video to one. I have two favorite presidents, and when I have like a favorite president, it's not necessarily about their accomplishments in the White House, though of course that factors in, but I am more interested in who they were as a person and their personality. One of my favorite presidents is Theodore Roosevelt, and Theodore was like larger than life. He was one of our most epic presidents, and he has some really great stories to him. However, he is not the favorite president that I'm doing in this particular video, though I can definitely see doing a video about Teddy in the future. My second favorite president, and of course, it's not even really in that order, though it's hard to beat Teddy, is Ulysses S. Grant. On my dad's side of the family, a great-great-great-grandfather served under Grant in the Western Campaign, and he must have had a very favorable view of Grant, as he would go on to name his second son Ulysses Sherman Hughes. Unfortunately, my great-great-grandfather was born before the Civil War, so he got the name Virgil. It's a real shame because, come on, Ulysses Sherman Hughes is a pretty epic name. And nowadays is like the best time to read up on Grant because there has been a resurgence in scholarly research for Grant, and he's been re-examined not only as a military leader but as a president. And if there was ever a president who deserved to be re-examined, it was Ulysses S. Grant. Yes, unfortunately, in the early 1900s, not so flattering things were done to his reputation as the Lost Cause movement moved in. It's a real shame because of all the U.S. presidents. If there was a decent person, Grant would have been one of them. And right now, the Syracuse Public Library has two phenomenal biographies on Grant. Right now, I'm holding American Ulysses by Ronald C. White. And this one I have read, and it's very thorough into Grant's life from childhood to kind of having the difficult relationship with his father, his reluctancy to go to West Point, though his father kind of like forced it upon him, and he was actually kind of hoping before he reached West Point that it would have been closed down. It was not, and the rest is kind of history. And in American Ulysses, he shines a light on Grant as a person. And Grant had his failures. He failed at several things in his life, but what I admire about Grant is he would always pick himself up. He would do what he had to do to be able to support his family, even if that meant dragging wood into town to sell, no matter how embarrassing that might have been for him personally. But this book really examines kind of the myths and struggles that Grant had. He did struggle with alcohol, and it kind of started when he was out west, isolated from his wife and his children, who he was very close to. It's hard to find a presidential love story as loving and caring as the relationship between Grant and his wife Julia. And at that point in isolation and probably a little depressed and bored out of his mind, he did turn to alcohol. But some of the accusations of drinking during the Civil War were probably not merited. And Ronald C. White really kind of dives into where like the rumors were coming from and other people who were close to Grant's recollections of the time. And I would not label Grant an alcoholic, but he was probably a binge drinker when he was bored or feeling lonely. And it goes all the way up to his presidency. After presidency, he was one of our first presidents to do a world tour once he was out of the White House, which was a boon for the United States relationships with different countries. He established the Justice Department. He pretty much eradicated the initial Ku Klux Klan. It came back in the early 1900s. Ironically, at a time when Grant's reputation was kind of being torn down. If you have ever been to Yellowstone, Grant signed Yellowstone in to become our first national park. And he also goes into perhaps one of Grant's biggest issues in life. He was a very trusting person. He wanted to believe in the best in every human being, and that would often come back to bite him. Because in his presidency, he trusted different people, put them on cabinets, and you get a lot of corruption in his career because he trusted the wrong people. And then even in his later life, he trusted a friend of one of his sons, and that friend would get the family involved in a very early Ponzi scheme and completely bankrupted the Grants. And at about the same time that happened, he developed throat cancer. And to be able to save his family from poverty, he's got together with Mark Twain and started working on his memoirs, which are perhaps the best memoirs ever written by a former U.S. president, even though he doesn't really cover his presidency in the memoirs. It's mostly focused on his time as a Civil War general. But they are very well written. He's pretty much to the point. And he very solemnly, when he was writing it, he very seldomly had a bad word to say about anyone in his memoirs. And that was just the type of person Grant was. And of course, and here, his career as a U.S. Civil War general was very highly covered, including his campaign at Vicksburg, which really shows how much of a military tactician Grant was. And then the second biography we have is Grant by Ron Chernow. And that name should probably ring a bell. Ron Chernow wrote the famous Hamilton biography, which was pretty much inspired the musical. Unfortunately, there is yet no musical on Grant. However, this inspired a miniseries that was produced by Leonardo DiCaprio on the History Channel. And I'll go into more details about that. As you can tell, the American Ulysses is a little bit more contained than the Chernow book. So if you don't want to go into like this thick of a book, American Ulysses. If you want to go into like a deep dive, Grant by Ron Chernow. And I have not read this one yet. I was actually gifted a copy of it for Christmas from my brother, so it's on my to-read list. But from like the little segments I have read, good book, very intensive, covers Grant's whole life. And if you want to pair any of like the books on Grant's life with any documentaries, the Syracuse Public Library does have The Civil War by Ken Burns. This is a very, very good documentary, but then again, I have not met a bad Ken Burns documentary. And this will give you like the whole picture of the Civil War in addition to information about Grant. And another one in our collection that I want to cover, since it's President's Day, and if you're wanting like a more deep dive on presidents in general, we have Mandate, The President and the People, and this is a 3-part series, but in the scholars explore decisive moments in the history of the presidency from George Washington to FDR. In terms of evergreen, you can get the Grant miniseries that I talked about earlier, which was produced by Leonardo DiCaprio for the History Channel. And as you can see, I actually own it. I got it for Christmas for my brother. He knows what I like, and it's Grant. And it's pretty good. It blends kind of documentary style, different historians and Grant experts with actors acting out different scenes in Grant's life. And sometimes like the actors are doing their thing, sometimes they're doing it and you'll have like a historian over top. But it's very well produced. And I had mentioned Grant's memoirs, and these memoirs should be a go-to read for people who are interested in not only Grant, but Civil War history, or even presidential memoir history. Because as I said, this is probably one of the best memoirs produced by a U.S. president, even though it does not really cover his presidency. And this is a super fancy annotated memoirs of Ulysses Grant that I actually ordered from the Grant Cottage out in New York. It is actually the site where Grant wrote most of his memoirs, and he would then end up passing. You can get different versions of Grant's memoirs via Evergreen, Libby, and Hoopla, but I definitely recommend it. You don't have to get like the super fancy version that I have to appreciate them, though I have to admit this is a very, very beautiful edition for like the memoirs. But that is all I have today. I hope you will check out either of these books or even find a Grant book through Evergreen. Until next Days in Our Lives, farewell.